Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Hi, I'm Terri Long.
And I'm Jeremy Eden, and we are the co-CEOs of Harvest Earnings.
Welcome to the Elephant in the Boardroom. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Doing all right. So, want to talk about something horrible that happened yesterday in Georgia, just briefly. Yet another school shooting. It's just horrific that this continues to happen, and it's so scary. And I was about to say my kids are out of school, but actually one of them's about to go get her master's, and it's just but out of the country. And other countries have this better than we do. We tolerate this despite the fact that supposedly, I don't know this for a fact, but seen surveys that 85 plus of the country wants background checks. And yet we tolerate our representatives not getting that done time and time again. So it's awful, but we're not going to talk about gun violence today. But it did make us both think about how tolerance plays a role. I mean, in our personal lives for sure, but in the workplace, we think of intolerance as a bad thing, but there are things we should be intolerant about. Take it away.
Well, and what's kind of disappointing and surprising is if you talk to people individually across the country, probably virtually to a person, everyone is appalled by this and wish something could be done, regardless of their politics or anything else. But collectively, we're stuck. And that has to do with the fact that we're humans who have these human behaviors that can lead to this situation. They don't have to lead to it, but they can. And in our work, we certainly see this in a much more, of course, mundane and much less important kind of ways than having to do with gun violence in schools. But the behaviors are the same. And how many times do we see in large corporations some of the same behaviors where people tolerate behaviors that they that in fact lead that company to be getting stuck on things that it could otherwise do rapidly and be a good thing that everyone would say, oh yeah, that was a good thing to do.
Yeah. People tolerate bad processes. I mean, all over, every company, all over, people tolerate bad processes. They tolerate poor performers. I mean, it is a common complaint that poor performers they're not compensated in a different way, and they're not shown the door in an efficient manner. People tolerate horrible behavior from high performers because they don't want to get rid of the high performer, but they don't know the damage it's doing to everybody else. What else do people tolerate?
They tolerate what we could call a lack of curiosity, or not only just a lack of intellectual curiosity, but a lack of what might be called, I don't know, social curiosity or something, by which I mean you are not only is this tolerated, it's encouraged. You should not be challenging your peers in any way that might sort of expose them as not having facts behind what they're saying. You should not challenge your superiors. And if you're curious about things and you want to get to the bottom of those things, you have to have a culture that encourages that kind of challenging, not one that tolerates people not doing that and in fact discourages people.
Yeah. And of course, inertia plays a major role in inappropriate tolerance.
Yeah.
It's just easier to tolerate sometimes, or at least people feel it is. It's easier to tolerate because it's hard to deal with the poor performer, right? There's the conflict angle that comes in, and it's scary to get rid of the high performer, and it's discouraging to bring up a bad process because often it happens, you do it and nothing changes, and then you give up over time. Right. So I guess it is human nature for us to tolerate, but it has a lot of ill consequences.
And there are a couple of other things. For example, I think we tolerate kind of mantras or reasons for things that aren't particularly true, but if you wave them around, then everybody goes, okay, that's valid. Like, oh, we're just so stressed and we're just so busy, we can't possibly do another thing. And everybody goes, yeah, we all feel stressed. We're all very busy. We probably can't do another thing. Now, if you did another thing, what would happen? Well, maybe something unimportant just wouldn't get done. Or maybe people that you think are going to leave aren't going to leave because this next thing you're doing is actually more exciting or more interesting and actually gets them emotionally engaged in a positive way. But there are these reasons that aren't really the reasons. They're the signaling to everybody else that if I wave the red flag on that one, we'll all agree that's okay.
Plus, I feel like there's a virtue that is imbued in the word tolerance that people still sort of cling to. Tolerance is seen as a good thing, but I think, well, not I think, I know we believe that at least in the workplace, it tends to cause more problems than it fixes. We need a lot more intolerance to make things better. And certainly when it comes to gun control, if we could be intolerant, vote out those that aren't doing the job, etc., things would be better.
Well, and that's why, this idea that, for example, we tolerate the politicians, but I mean, LBJ made it very clear during before the Civil Rights Bill was passed, that the civil rights movement had to force his hand. He was in complete agree with them. It wasn't that intellectually he disagreed. It was that he could not mobilize the political forces necessary unless there was tremendous pressure from the bottom. And that if they could deliver that pressure, he could then deliver the votes, which is exactly what happened. So what Martin Luther King and everybody did to lead from the bottom. So in many ways, and in companies this is true, we blame the damn boss or corporate headquarters or the CEO, but that's because we in the middle or the bottom aren't mobilizing in an appropriate way. This isn't saying you should march on your corporate headquarters. This is a different kind of thing.
Although strikes do often make a difference, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we're not suggesting that.
Right.
What we're talking about,
but mobilizing, if 6 different business units and departments that are often at odds with each other come together and unify around a rich fact-based different way of doing something and present that in a way that is all of them together, we've seen thousands of times where that actually then gets done and gets done with relatively little conflict. Where the boss thought, oh my God, if I do this, I'm going to have to take somebody's side and be against somebody else, or I'm going to have to convince somebody to do something. No. So part of this isn't just blaming the politicians, it's blaming ourselves for not controlling our natural behaviors so that we behave in a way that helps the collective.
Yeah. And when you say we've seen it thousands of times, you are actually not being hyperbolic.
I am not, which apparently you sometimes think I can be.
Yes, well, you of course like to say you're being a bit hyperbolic. Does amuse me. So are there other human behaviors besides inertia and conflict avoidance that we think gets in the way of good intolerance?
Well, again, I know we don't want to really make this about gun control, but one of the things that's interesting about the NRA is that one of the things it did very effectively was to create clubs and groups and events that made people feel part of a community. And that's because we all want to be part of a community. And that feels good.
We are tribal.
I'm sorry?
We are tribal.
We are tribal. And so in corporations, for sure, there is often this go along to get along, because you want to be part of something and not be the, as I think Joe posted once in a cartoon form, you don't want to be the sand in the bathing suit. You don't want to be the irritant, the one that's left out, the one that's not included. And that limits often because you misjudge often that if you're intellectually honest or you're challenging or you're curious, that somehow that will be a bad thing. Though there's often many ways of doing that in a perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. So I guess fear plays a role, as it does in so many behaviors that get in people's way of success and happiness and other good things.
Fear of losing out, fear of missing out.
Yes, fear of being laughed at, fear of being wrong, fear of, I don't know, there's so many. And probably also self-doubt, is this real? Am I right?
Right.
Imposter syndrome, all of that.
So I guess one question that people can ask themselves is, okay, just like I probably can't control the whole country and change the outcomes of things all over the place, though maybe I can by being one of these part of mobilizing from the bottom up. What am I doing in my world that's making other people who respect me or report to me or interact with me, what am I doing that makes them fearful or makes them conflict averse? What did I do today in some meeting that's encouraging this tolerance rather than encouraging intolerance of these bad behaviors?
Yeah. And equally, what are you tolerating from your kids, from your spouse, from your neighbors that is getting in the way of you, living your best life?
Right.
Not to get too deep and philosophical, but it applies everywhere.
And the ironic thing is, of course, there are many times, but not always, which is the hitch in calculating the probability of a bad outcome, is you address an issue, and rather than the person getting angry or quitting or being whatever, they're like, I know, I feel bad about that, I want to work on that.
Yeah, of course, making me think of defending the caveman, but
that is exactly what I was thinking of. Yes,
I don't think I'll describe that at the moment.
That is exactly it.
Up with men acknowledging that sometimes they're not the best human beings. And of course, it applies to women as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that it can be. The problem is often that these fears we have, or the conflict avoidance, or the go along to get along, we let build up. So by the time we're even willing to address it, we address it out of a sense of anger or blame or shame or something, rather than I must be doing something that's, or we must be doing something that's eliciting this reaction. What could we do? Or I'm not sure how you approach these, but
well, it's always better to not let things get to a boiling point, which does certainly happen when we tolerate things longer than we should. Because then you're not in a position to address it in the best way to get the best outcome.
I remember when I was a summer intern at Booz Allen. This was a big deal for me because I'd never worked in the private sector, and this job could open that up, or if I didn't get an offer back, it could shut it down. And so there was a lot of pressure. And I'm, like many people, a workaholic. I was happy to work all the time. But in this environment, people were leaving when they were sort of done with their work at 5 or 6 or something. And over time, I noticed that the engagement manager above me was getting increasingly snippy and annoyed with me. And I could not for the life of me figure out why. And I finally just asked him. And he said, well, you leave without checking in with me about if there's anything else that needs to be done. And I was thinking, we were on different floors, so it's not like I passed by his office. And I said, I have absolutely nowhere to go and nothing to do. And it had just not occurred to me. And so, of course, then I always called him, to make sure there was anything. And if he had anything, even for someone else, I was happy to do it. And it made a huge difference in our relationship. And it turned out he then was the guy that battled for me to get an offer to come back, which I got. I did not go back, but and
it's, first of all, shame on him for not telling you in the first place.
But that he didn't want the conflict.
Yeah, good on you for not tolerating the increasing snippiness without
Yeah.
addressing it. But oftentimes the boss's behavior occurs, but the person isn't comfortable. You don't want to hear that. I mean, that's you know it's going to be a bad answer. So it's very hard
Right.
to do what you did.
And I didn't do it out of courage. I did it out of fear because I saw my chance of a big change in life disappearing. And so
You have a very assertive personality. Very assertive personality. And, most people don't. Most people are, I mean, there's a bell curve and there's an
Right.
average amount. And that's a really hard thing to do because you're asking for negative feedback. It's not going to be, oh, you've just been doing so well that it's irritating to me. You're making me look bad. I mean, somebody would never admit that, even if that was the case. It's hard to do. So anyway, I think we should just make the punch the point, be more intolerant, people. Obviously, we still recommend tolerating things that should be tolerated. Differences in, race, religion, gender, sexual preference, all that stuff. Tolerance, great. So many things we tolerate that we shouldn't, though. So let's stop it.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.